Every once in a while, we check in on Donald Trump Jr.'s podcast, Triggered. Now, it's called Triggered because MAGA has this obsession with feeling like they're triggering the libs, right? Own the libs. And it is strange to so greatly identify your movement with the behavior of making upset a different movement. Couldn't you have more to identify with? But okay, Triggered is his podcast. Very exciting stuff. And I always think it's notable that he seems rather disheveled, distraught, and in distress whenever we see him in this podcast. Deranged, dangerous, I don't know, add as many words as you want. And here he's losing his mind over a story that we've seen a lot of right-wing media obsessing over and very angry about, and it relates to, you'll see, but furries is what they're referred to as. And this is funny for what he says, and also because I want to use this as a jumping off point for a really important conversation, if you can even imagine. And then we'll look at some other clips as well. But first, here is Donald Trump Jr., very fixated, and he spent a bunch of the show talking about this. I'll just show 33 seconds. Fixated on furries.
The furry is like the trans community. They're going to be totally protected. They can bark at people. They can distract it because they think they're dogs and cats. We have to accommodate their insanity. Now, if someone says something or pushes back, I guarantee you the normal person that's trying to get an education, that's trying to learn in school, trying to be left alone from people who'd otherwise be certifiably insane if it wasn't for 2024, that person's the one that's going to get in trouble, not the idiot.
Yeah, so someone is certifiably insane, as he said. I think it just might be the guy on screen who is a grown adult obsessing over students who dress as animals. Okay, that's the fixation. In some school somewhere is the story you're talking about. Really, Don. We have food insecurity in schools, but the story out of a school he wants to talk about relates to children dressing as animals. Oh, goodness. Now, if you're not familiar, that's what furry refers to. People who, as a hobby, I guess, dress up as animals. And you don't have to understand the appeal of such activity to get that other people have other hobbies. I don't go to Comic-Con, for example, but I am sure it's a blast to go and dress up as a comic book character. And I will warn Don, if he's this been out of shape about animals and animal costumes, then I will warn him there's a time, if I'm not mistaken, shortly before November, where people dress as all sorts of things, and it's going to blow his mind. He's really going to hate it. And then they come to your door and they knock on it and they say, trick or treat. But I do refuse, I will say explicitly, to engage on the substance, if you want to call it that, of what he's talking about. I saw it was referring to Utah, so I think he's talking about a story that got a lot of coverage in right-wing media, and as so often happens, it seems like they were sort of bending the facts a little bit to get people all riled up, and there's always an epidemic of craziness, and then you look into it and it's being blown way out of proportion. But at best, if there is some story just taking from his context clues of someone barking at a student and students being upset about it, that's something that can be dealt with at that school. We don't need to have a national conversation about that, okay? There are millions and millions of people. Someone somewhere is going to be barking at someone, okay? That's just how it goes. Not cause for a big national political conversation. And that gets us to the really important part of this, which is that why do we see so often these stories obsessed over, especially in right-wing media? You don't see the same phenomenon in mainstream liberal media. When you go on right-wing media, though, so often these very obscure, very niche, particular little example, they get obsessed over. Like, here's an example. This story turned out to be completely false, but we've heard time and time again from the likes of Don Jr. about litter boxes in bathrooms, that kids are identifying as animals, and so then they're going to the restroom in litter boxes in bathrooms. Completely false. Wasn't true. But it got talked about, and sometimes it's still brought up in right-wing media. Or this obsession with furries or drag queens, the whole rave about that. Oh my gosh, they're gonna climb through your window and turn your kid gay or something. And the reason why they spend so much time and effort finding these stories, then signal boosting them on social media, then making them seem like a really big issue, is because they have nothing else. They can't engage on policy. Because if the Republican movement right now just ran against Joe Biden on policy, they would get trounced. Whether it be because of the threat that Trump poses to democracy, one side respecting our democratic institutions and our democratic process, and one with both a record and intentions to show for an individual who wants to destroy our democratic process, or reproductive rights. You want to have a debate about the merits of that and the Republican record versus Democratic, and where Americans stand, obviously siding in a major way with Democrats on that issue. Even the economy doing really well right now with still issues, but doing really well by the metrics we use to measure such a thing, outpacing our G7 counterparts, doubling the GDP growth of every other G7 country. Healthcare, you want to talk about Biden lowering prescription drug costs, Trump promising to do that, but not getting it done. Trump never bringing forward a healthcare plan. And we could go on and on. Trump wanting to terminate the ACA, something that would be very unpopular. If they had conversations just about the actual big issues, the actual things that impact people's lives, and didn't focus on things like furries or drag queens. And I have to say, I've never heard Joe Biden speak the word furry in my entire life, so clearly not a part of his policy platform. Then they would lose so badly. And so my request to Americans at large is, please keep your eye on the ball. Right now, democracy's on the line. Women's rights are on the line. Not to mention numerous policy issues, whether it be gun violence, whether it be, like I said, healthcare, whether it be caring for our veterans or investing in the energy of the future, whether it be protecting workers' rights and allowing them to organize properly to advocate on their own behalf. These issues matter so much and impact so many people's lives, and Biden has the better policy position on all of them compared to Donald Trump. And that's why Don Jr. has to spend time talking about some school in Utah where someone barked. And I'm serious. Notice it. How often are these sorts of topics obsessed over in right-wing media? It's all too often. And the consequential issues, they just cannot bring forward a good policy agenda on. Even the border, that's the one sort of policy issue that they seem to politically benefit on. But if you look at the facts, if people could actually look at the facts, they see that right now MAGA Republicans are the ones blocking progress on that by blocking this bipartisan border deal that's endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, and Joe Biden's advocating for it. So a whole lot of rhetoric and fear-mongering, not actual policy proposals. Here's more from Don Jr.
You'll never know. If it was someone who even remotely conservative, I'm sure they would have thrown him off. The Democrats, they're evil and they're smart. They'll show up there in a MAGA hat and pretend they're conservative and unbiased, and then they'll go in there and they'll do the bidding of the fascists, the Democrat Party.
Yeah, instead of going in and acting like you're unbiased, they would go in and wear a MAGA hat, which would also be perceived as biased. And they're just lazily trying to deteriorate the belief in this criminal trial involving his father, and no matter which lies they tell or which conspiracy theories about liberals and MAGA hats they push, this case will go on and justice hopefully will prevail. Here's another moment.
And let's get into some of those top headlines, because we got some crazy times. We've been sold out on Ukraine, rhinos, Democrats, Capitol Hill, the swamp creatures, the billionaire class donors. They are pushing Joe Biden's wish list and sending billions to Ukraine. The bill is a disaster.
The bill is a disaster. Now, I have said this a few times now, but I really cannot get my head around what the heck this opposition to helping Ukraine is within MAGA. Where does it derive itself from? But the best answer is there's an ideological alignment between the authoritarianism of Putin and some of his other ideological stances and the current MAGA movement. That's frightening, and their hope that Trump could become more of a Putin-like figure, or just being knee-jerk opposed to anything that Joe Biden is very clearly for. But we're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene push this revolt against Mike Johnson over a few different things, but Ukraine aid is a huge part of it. And she's so obsessively, a Democratic congressman described it as demented in the way that Marjorie Taylor Greene is opposed to and has this visceral hatred for Ukraine. And there, Don Jr. is bolstering that message. It is very difficult to understand when there seems to be, separate from, even though we should care about this, but MAGA obviously doesn't, separate from the sovereignty of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people and the aid going to defend and support those. Also, just selfishly from the United States' perspective, making sure Russia cannot prevail here is absolutely in our interest as well. But all of that goes by the wayside, and now there's this huge opposition within MAGA to a dollar going to the effort to support Ukraine's defense of themselves. Then Bannon brought on Donald Trump Jr.
Jury could take forever. You could see last night, as we curated MSNBC and CNN, the gleam in their eye, understanding Biden hurts himself every day. He's on the campaign trail. President Trump drives the message, drives the energy, drives his numbers every day he is. Their plan right now, brother, I think, is to drag this thing out past Memorial Day. The judge...
Okay, so Trump has been the one trying to delay his cases over and over and over. So don't talk to me about dragging it out. But also, I just wanted to play that Steve Bannon part, because sometimes these talking points are established, then never updated for new information. And so they have this idea that Biden can't campaign, or that hurts him, even though since he started actually campaigning, his numbers have gotten a lot better. And we talked about how his State of the Union address had a really positive impact on people's perception of his policy record and policy vision for the future. So he's absolutely incorrect on that. Biden's been all over the place lately. Seems to be helping his approval rating and poll numbers. And I think as people see Trump more and he's more in their face, it's going to hurt Trump's approval ratings and his prospects in this election. Let me know what you thought of all that. Oh my goodness, in the comments.